Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this week's Global Dawah Movement Show. I'm joined in the studios by Imran Hussain.
Assalamu alaikum, brother.
Wa alaikum salam.
How are you?
I'm good.
Very good.
Good. So, this week's show, we're going to be talking about atheism, evidence and certainty.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So, me and you and a lot of duat have been out there engaging in conversations about Islam.
Yep.
And when we do that, we come across some atheists, right?
We come across loads of atheists.
We come across a lot of atheists, right? And some of them even watch this show,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And when we do that, when we're trying to engage in conversations about theology, theism, there's always a common question that they seem to ask.
Yeah.
It's a common theme.
Yeah, and what we're referring to is they ask for evidence, basically,
Yes.
right? And it's fine for them to ask for evidence because that's how discussions start, and that's the
Yes.
sort of route that discussions with atheists normally take. It's based on evidence, which is fine. They ask for evidence for God's existence.
Yes.
That's not a problem. What we want to discuss in this show is what are the presuppositions behind the inquiry, right? So what I mean by this is what type of evidence, what are they looking for when they ask for evidence for God's existence? Right?
Yes.
This is important, and I believe it's important for several reasons. One being that unless we can understand what they're looking for, we'll just give them whatever we can, but it may not be what they want.
They
right?
may not be satisfied.
Or it might not be the correct approach. They may
Right.
be asking the wrong question, right?
Okay.
So unless we establish these foundations of the discussion first, we won't have a productive discussion,
Fine.
right? So what I want to discuss today is this very thing. And what the first thing I want to discuss is this, is that generally, from experience and from seeing other brothers discuss with atheists and seeing other conversations, generally speaking, when atheists ask for evidence, they are looking for a particular type of evidence.
Right.
And that type of evidence is physical evidence, scientific evidence, empirical data, basically,
Yes.
right? For God's existence.
Yes.
Well, yeah. We're looking for something which is testable and therefore verifiable. If it is not testable and therefore not verifiable, it is invalid evidence as it is purely subjective and thus little better than anecdotal evidence. If you were able to provide another form of testable evidence, i.e. something which could be verified, I would be open to that as well. What I'm not open to are assertions along the lines of, I felt tingly this one time, that was God, that is evidence. I am not open to that.
Now, straight off the bat, this is the wrong approach, right? It's not correct. Why? All it takes is understanding the nature of God and understanding the nature of science, right?
Yes.
Now, we know from the Islamic perspective that God is not physical. Okay? Allah is unlike anything we can imagine. As Allah says in the Quran, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. He's unlike anything you can imagine, basically,
Yes.
right?
And yet, if he is unlike anything you could ever imagine, how is it that people have imagined similar things before? Now, I of course believe the God of Islam is imagined, but since that deity is being discussed, we shall place it to one side. Both the Christians and the Jews imagined a similar God before yours and was in fact the basis for your God. Then we have the Sikh God Waheguru, who is described as one timeless, omnipresent supreme creator. Sounds pretty similar, but these could simply be attempts to describe God, as one could attempt to describe a shape that was a perfect pyramid and a perfect sphere. Yet what reveals an even greater issue here is that if your God is just too vast to imagine and comprehend, then your religion is pointless. How can your religion describe that which cannot be described? If I was to note the facts that a perfect pyramid that was simultaneously a perfect spherical sphere is impossible to imagine, no problem. But to then go to claim that I have information in a pamphlet which allows one to do so would instantly catch me out. So either Islam cannot comprehend God and thus should be discarded as useless, or your God can be comprehended, in which case Islam is simply false. So which is it? Is Islam false or useless? Make your choice now.
He created the physical universe, he created everything that exists, but he's not a part of it, and he's unlike it,
Yes.
right? we can't imagine God. We can't quantify God in a physical way, in any way, shape, or form, right?
Yes.
Understanding this about the nature of God, and also understanding the nature of science, which is science is based on or can deal with things what are observable, right? It deals with observable realities. It can't deal with things which are beyond this, right? And understanding these two things, then you can't use or ask for empirical scientific data for God, because when you inquire scientifically, you're looking for observable things. But in the case of God, God is not physically observable and is not limited. You can't quantify God empirically or scientifically, directly at least, right? So understanding this, asking for empirical data or evidence for God is wrong, right?
Then where did your religion come from? Now, I believe imagination. However, I assume from the facts that you are Muslim, you disagree. There are no supernatural senses. There are only natural ones. Why? Because our senses are what define natural versus supernatural. How did Muhammad know what to write in the Quran? There must have been some way for Allah to transfer the information he needed to get out in the Quran to Muhammad. Now, why is it impossible for your all-powerful God to replicate that, but for the entire population of Earth, simultaneously in whatever language they speak? See, if he's actually all-powerful, then it cannot be the case of he cannot supply evidence, but rather will not. In which case I have the right to question that structure as a closed system, the sort created by a con man to avoid further questions and critical thought. If God exists and is truly all-loving and wants our love and respect, then he must earn it. If I were a parent and I was to neglect my child in being completely absent from birth, to only then turn up and punish them, that would be foul in itself. But could you imagine if when my child asked me why, I said they didn't love me and respect me, followed by the assertions that it was their responsibility as my child to make that move towards me when they say I showed no interest or even that I was still alive, as is the analogy to God's existence in this scenario. That's not just wrong, that is fundamentally sick and twisted and would repulse any decent human being. Now apply the exact same standard to your deity. He either doesn't want our respect and is going to punish us and therefore doesn't deserve it, or does not exist. Your choice.
Now, some atheists at this point may, say, fine, okay, I understand that point. Now let's discuss what else do you have. Give me some rational argumentation, so on. Fine, we can discuss on that level.
Yes.
But now we are having a good discussion, right, at this point. But there are some atheists and individuals who even at this point won't be satisfied, right? Because they have this preconception, this presupposition that scientific evidence is the only way to truth.
The only means to truth.
Only way to truth. This is called scientism, basically, right? And whether atheists or generally people who are inquiring believe this, accept this, not, there is this undertone in society, which is that they hold this idea, or they see the world through the lenses of scientism, or a form of scientism. What I mean by this is, there is this underlying idea that things we believe in, or we should believe in, should be empirically validated.
Well, your scientism is a straw man of what our actual point is. Whether or not something exists is not a question of philosophy in either methodology or ethics. It is a question on the reality of nature, how things came to be, operate, and exist. This is a question for science. For everything else, when we discuss its existence, we use science. Black swans, the classic example when discussing the scientific method, were found through exploration and thorough taxonomy in biology. The Higgs boson, originally a theoretical particle, was found by the utilization of physics and the breakdown of test data to reveal this elementary particle. Existence is the realm of science. That is a fact. So for you to pretend otherwise whilst mocking people who actually understand science only reveals your greater ignorance. So it is not only a straw man you have presented here, but also special pleading in demanding that God not be put on the same scrutiny as everything else. He is special. So I have compiled a list of possible t-shirt slogans you are free to use in future. Allah's not just imaginary, He's a special kind of imaginary. Science is for idiots, try blind faith, and my personal favourite, ask us for anything except evidence for God's existence, which, by the way, is why we're here in the sodding first place, so ask yourself, what are we actually being paid for? A rather long slogan, I must admit, but one of my personal favourites.
Right?
It's true, but science works. Science works in society.
Of course it works. Well, we're not saying science doesn't work. What we're saying is science isn't the only way to truth. Right?
Okay, that's the
This is the difference. And I have a very interesting quote that I came across earlier. It's by Freeman Dyson. And I think he really sums this up well when he says, the public has a distorted view of science because children are taught in schools that science is a collection of firmly established truths. In fact, science is not a collection of truths, it is a continuing exploration of mysteries.
Wow.
Right? So essentially what he's saying, and he makes a very valid point, that science doesn't deal with facts. Right?
Wrong. He is critiquing the idea that science has already discovered everything there is to know about the universe, a fact that would have been obvious had you not simply quote-mined the article linked below. The segment in question is discussing the flood of information and communication, as well as the negative and positive implications. Now, under the positive, it discusses how, unlike textbooks which are static from the moment of publishing, online information sources like Wikipedia are constantly being updated, which mirrors science more closely. See, it is true that science is not solely a database, but rather the database is both a product and resource of science. It is an information loop gradually growing in understanding, focused around the natural world, where science continually updates and replaces old information whilst adding newer information. Cropping your source so that it appears to agree with you is not a great way to go about things. You know this, Mr. Hussein.
Science is something you use, it's a method, and it can bring you close to certainty, close to truth, but it can't give you 100% truth. We're going to discuss this near the end.
Right.
But the point being, it's not the only way to truth, but although our social environment it's built in a way which we're informed, or we're programmed, if you like, in a way to grow up believing or thinking that science is the best way to truth, or the only way to truth,
Yes.
right? When it's not. Right? So we have to correct this understanding. And scientism isn't true anyway. Science isn't the only way to truth. Because, I mean, let's look at a simple example. Try to prove the statement, science is the only way to truth, scientifically. You can't do it.
You can't
right?
do it.
If science was the only way to truth, you would never know that to be true.
Absolutely, yeah.
You would never be able to substantiate that, validate that, right? So it doesn't work. If that was the case, you would have to reject all other types of truths: moral truths, ethical truths, mathematical truths, logical truths. Many things science uses itself, right? But you can't validate them scientifically. It doesn't make sense,
Yes.
right? So holding on to scientism it's not correct. Right? Now, whether that's you're doing that deliberately, or whether that's been, that's just been programmed into you as you grow up, either way, you have to let go of this notion of scientism, right? Science isn't the only way to truth. I just want to drive this home, right?
Right, but aside from the straw man position labelled scientism, can you provide the evidence required to prove your deity's existence on the same grounds that we utilise to prove the existence of everything else? The question, does X exist, is one of science, and I demonstrated earlier with the black swan and Higgs boson that this is the case. So all this discussion on ethics and methodology is irrelevant. It's a red herring. Is God's existence a question of morality? No. It may have implications on it, but it is in itself not a moral one. Is God's existence a question of methodology? No. Again, it may have implications on methodology, but it is not in itself a methodological one. All this video is doing is attempting to answer a very basic question. What evidence do you have for God? You could select from what convinced you, and if I found that to be invalid, I could then point out why, e.g. that one time when you got all tingly proves the existence of the ass-eating mantis as much as it does your God, maybe even more so. The best thing to do is just go with what convinced you that Allah was real, and maybe listen openly to what the skeptic has to say in response, as it could reveal more about you than you may expect.
Now, the next thing I want to move on to quickly is understanding that you can't have empirical data, direct scientific observations for God, right? Understanding scientism isn't true for the sake of argument, right? If for somehow you could give empirical data for God's existence, direct observable data for God's existence, would that give the atheist certainty? And I would argue no. Right? So what they're looking for, the certainty they're looking for via the inquiry through science, will not give them certainty in the first place. Even if you could give it. That's if you could give empirical data for God, which you can't. You can't give scientific.
And where the hell did this 100% certainty come from? That's not what is typically asked. Fact is that, as of yet, there is zero evidence for God. A big fat zero. However, this does bring up the question about whether a supposed all-powerful, all-knowing deity should be able to do that, be able to provide evidence that gives you 100% certainty, or are they not all-powerful and not all-knowing? Kind of a conundrum you have there.
Why wouldn't scientific evidence lead to certainty?
Good. We've discussed this many times before, and that is one problem being the problem of induction. Right?
Yes.
And we know the problem of induction, and this is just one problem which highlights that science can't give you absolute truth.
Absolutely.
Right? Because according to the problem of induction, you go from a limited set of data always, and you formulate a general conclusion based on that limited set of data.
Right.
And it's possible that your future observations will be different.
Yes.
Right? An example we give is, imagine you're a scientist, you're commissioned to observe sheep in the fields of London. You spend 6 months in the fields of London, you observe sheep, and you see that all sheep that you've observed, so you observe 20,000 sheep, are white. Right? Now, it's possible that the next sheep or the next 10 sheep are brown.
Right.
But based on your data so far, you've only observed white sheep, and therefore you conclude that all sheep in the fields of London are white. Right? You induce this.
Yes.
Right? But it's not 100% true.
Yes.
Right? So this is the problem. So science can't give you certainty anyway. That's if you can ask a question about a scientific, if you can ask for scientific evidence for God, which you can't do anyway.
You can't, yes. Right? Beyond the realm of science.
But it is science that will prove that the brown sheep exist, thus falsifying the claim that all sheep are white. Why? Because the existence of something is a question for science, as you just demonstrated there. So we've gone full circle back to the special pleading of God is exempt from this rule, used on all other things. Why? Because I say so.
So I guess what I'm trying to say is this. When an atheist approaches a Muslim and wants to discuss God's existence with him, you cannot approach him with a mindset of scientism. It's unrealistic, it doesn't make sense, and it's wrong.
Yep. I mean, it gives a skewed picture of the world anyway.
Yeah, and it gives you a skewed perspective. If you approach a Muslim from that perspective, you're asking for something which you can't ask for. It doesn't make sense, right? You're asking for physical evidence for God, but we know God isn't physical. Simple, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there are many other means to truth. For example, we know that we have rational ways of discussing things, right? We have deductive reasoning. We have authentic and valid testimony. That's another route to truth. It's something that's used in science as well.
Yes.
And there's many other means to truth.
And yet, Mission Dawah and the meta-organisation iERROR have failed to put forward any. Instead, they have resorted to a misinformation campaign which has involved lying to students across the UK, lying about their sources, quote mining, and generally feeling that they are in no way accountable for this deeply entrenched dishonesty which has been fashioned into a bludgeon to be utilised against any critic. That is what your group is. That is the legacy of Mission Dawah and iERROR.
And the last thing we want to discuss, and I know you want to touch upon this, was from a Muslim perspective. Now I'm going to ask you the question.
Yes.
what is our means to the truth of God?
Well, yeah, this is important to understand, and especially for atheists, when we're engaging in discussions, is to understand the Muslim perspective when it comes to a means to truth. As Muslims, what we believe that everyone is born upon this fitrah. And what fitrah means is this natural, innate state, which means, believing in God is something that is built into you, which is programmed into you.
No, you don't want to go there, buddy. You really do not want to go there.
And what's interesting about this is,
I would suggest stopping it now.
even studies have been conducted to show this is a true statement, that we believe that first and foremost that we are programmed to believe in God.
Why? Every bloody time I skewer you guys on this piece of misinformation, I went through every single one of iERROR's 6 sources when I called out Hamza Tzortzis on this, the ones found in this clip.
And for example, we said the key psychological issues in the study of religion. We have Science Points to God, which was published in 2002. We have in the International Journal of Psychology by Petrovich, it's called Japanese Children's Explanation of the Origins of Natural Objects, some comparisons with UK children.
Yep.
She has in the Journal of Psychological Reports, 1999, Preschool Children's Understanding of the Dichotomy Between the Natural and the Artificial. We also have in the International Journal of Psychology, Childhood Artificialism and Early Ontological Knowledge. We also have The Philosophy of Moral Development, Volume 1, Petrovich, 1982, in the British Journal of Psychology, and there's a few more.
The first was a research proposal. The second was a chapter she'd written for a non-peer-reviewed book, co-written by clergymen and other religious scientists on how to bastardize science into accepting God. The third was a lecture abstract describing the topic of her talk in a single paragraph for an upcoming psychology convention. The fourth was a study on how children were able to dichotomize natural and created objects, which is really irrelevant beyond questioning what you just asserted. The fifth was another 1-paragraph lecture abstract on the before-mentioned study. The sixth was on moral development and has nothing to do with the topic in the slightest. So no, this is an active lie. I know it to be so, as I personally took them through their sources one by one. I displayed how they had not a single study that agreed with them. Yet here they sit, lying still. This is not genuinely misinformed. This is malicious misinformation designed to lie about the field of science and what it has shown. How am I supposed to react to a lie besides calling it out as a lie? My original title was planned as iERROR, Ask Us for Anything Except Evidence for God's Existence, but that just changed now. Please, let your arguments evolve. Realize that you are pitting yourself against people who have actual access to your supposed sources and know you are lying to your viewers. This is why iERROR and its many heads need to be held accountable. Because at the current, you lie and for the most part go unchallenged. Well, I'm here to say, bugger that.
And then we use rational arguments, rational reasoning to come to the conclusion that there must be a creator.
Yeah.
And then we get our knowledge. We understand, when it comes to the real world, there's 2 types of knowledge. There's acquired knowledge, which is knowledge which we gain from understanding the world, studying the natural world, but also revealed knowledge. And we understand that the Quran is the final revelation to God.
I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said that every child is born in the fitrah,
Absolutely.
right? This innate disposition, right?
Yes.
So what we're saying is that the belief in God, first of all, is innate knowledge. This is
Yes.
the third type of knowledge, right,
Yes.
that we claim. And it's God has placed this within us,
Yes.
right?
Wrong by all accounts of science. iERROR has failed on all occasions to provide a valid source for this claim and should desist from making said assertion in future until they have fixed that issue. Fact is that without cultural enforcement, a person is not likely to believe in God. How do we know? There are entire tribes of people without religion, e.g. the Pirahas tribe, who don't even have words for God in their language, not to mention the thousands of children raised in secular families in even religious countries who simply never pick up on the religious pressure. Your views are not only unscientific, but easily falsifiable. You continue to claim that all sheep are white years after I have walked a Hebridean sheep into your office personally and sat down on your desk. You lie.
And obviously, we have also rational faculties that we've been blessed with, and
Yes.
we can engage in rational discussion and argumentation,
Absolutely.
and we have good reasons to believe rationally God exists as well. And on top of it, we can use empirical data.
Yes.
But here's the point we need to understand. We can use empirical data. We can look at what science is showing us.
Yes.
And then based on that information and data, we can infer what best explains these realities.
Yes.
Right? So you can say, in other words, it's indirect
Yes.
evidence for God's existence, right?
Absolutely.
Not direct. So, for example, you can look at the universe, and you can look at the order in the universe, the laws that govern the universe, and so on. You can say, you know what? There must be a lawgiver because there's laws that are present in the universe, right?
Yes.
So you can infer based on the
Yes.
evidence, but this is indirect, okay?
Yes.
So we have many other. It's more of a holistic approach to
Absolutely.
reality, right?
Actually, that relies more on a bastardization of the English language, but then again, iERROR has already shown that it's not shy of doing so, as with Hamza Tzortzis when he flopped in his debate with Lawrence Krauss, after not being able to read and understand a basic sentence from Krauss's book in attempts to misrepresent him.
And I think it's beautiful as well because it shows the greatness of God. You know,
Yes.
God is not limited to direct observation. God is beyond all of these physical things,
Yes,
right?
yes.
I think Numani Khan, just to finish off, made a beautiful point. He said, you know, animals require physical evidence, right?
Yes.
If there's a fire in a building and there's an announcement made that, you know, there's a fire, evacuate the building, the cat that's sitting in the building is not going to go anywhere.
Yes.
The cat's going to stay there unless it sees the fire or feels the fire, and then unless it gets the observable evidence, then it will
Yes.
move.
Yes.
But the human being has rational faculties,
Yes.
right? He will hear the announcement and he think, you know what, it's probably safe I leave, right?
Or make the rational.
You make the rational
decision.
choice.
No, I don't know if you knew this, but cats don't speak human. Every species of social animal has their own alarm response, from the smallest ant to the largest killer whale. So your analogy is as well constructed as your understanding of science.
So there's
Yeah.
many other means to truth and understanding reality and the world. And scientism, it's just flawed, and asking for or holding the view that unless you can scientifically prove something, it's not true. It's just a flawed way of approaching
It's a
things.
flawed way, and it gives you an unbalanced view of the world. You know, when you're looking through the world through that lens, you need to have a balanced approach. And we believe this is the best approach to understanding the world and to ultimately to live your life.
Yeah.
And
I
just
mean, Brother Hamza has a beautiful argument based on the fitra itself, this
Yes.
innate disposition. It's not just a wild claim that we're making. There is evidence to support this. We can link in the paper,
the video, yes,
the video of the paper, and people can go study that further as well.
Yep.
Just to note that they did not do so, here is a screenshot. But please still check my video going over the sources they provided me last time I went after them.
And just to conclude, you know, for all you atheists, God is not a scientific hypothesis, right?
Yeah, as Dawkins would say. And this is the problem, is popularizers like Dawkins who push this narrative, God is a scientific hypothesis. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
Yes, he has a PhD, he's made many wild claims in the past, right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean they're true, right? So we need to start inquiring and thinking about these things ourselves.
So I hope that's been beneficial. Please like, share and subscribe to our channel and join us for next week's Global Dawah Movement show. Assalamu alaikum.
Just because you say the existence of God is not a hypothesis that needs to be validated scientifically, does not make it so. And there is nothing, I repeat, nothing in this video that demonstrates otherwise. All I have found are the usual suspects of quote mining, straw men, and direct dishonesty. How much further can you sell your Titanic of a claim that the fitra exists when I and other secular-minded critics have riddled your arguments with holes, or even blown the hull out completely? As for scientism, that's just a word utilized by people who lack the capacity to understand how this method works and are upset at the fact that it does not support their beliefs. I don't know if you knew this, but science does not stop being science merely because it doesn't support what you say. That's called confirmation bias, and I suggest you actually start understanding science, shut up about the fitra until you get some actual evidence, and simply cease being on this channel. Because quite clearly you're not bringing forward anything new, you're just going to continue to bring out the same old refuted lies. What am I to do? I'm going to keep on hitting you like this until you stop.